I'd like to talk about nihilism, and in particular the difference between an ordinary type of nihilism versus what I call a liberal type of nihilism. Nihilism is a very controversial subject because today there's negative connotations around the word nihilism, and we don't think into the classical sense of nihilism. And what I'm about to say is that nihilism can be a good in the political sphere, whether you're a Marxist, a nationalist, an internet blogger, or way of thinking, because we have lost the values and wisdom that we learned from nihilism. So, the way I described ordinary nihilism is kind of when nihilism was first conceived of and the benefits of nihilism. Another word I would like to call is a positive type of nihilism. This actually could be seen in the works of Friedrich Nietzsche. But to learn more about nihilism than from Nietzsche himself, I would recommend a book by Bret Stephens titled Nihilism, a philosophy based in nothingness and eternity. Stephens had the Anus Society and America blog for some time. I know for a fact Stephens does not like me. And once he told me that miscegenation is defeat or miscegenation is doom or something. He basically was telling me don't race mix, which is unfortunate on Stevens' end. But Stevens is sympathetic to nationalism and right wing ideology, but he has a very good understanding of nihilism, and I highly recommend his book on it. But ordinary nihilism is a type of nihilism that affirms that I would like to call quote unquote life affirming, that there may be nothing in the universe and nothing grand or higher, but man is Promethean, quote unquote, that he wants to go to the stars, wants to colonize Mars, wants to have a family, wants to make a better society. It's almost fascist leaning in some respects. And that this type of nihilism also respects the understanding that we are humble human beings, that we're not pretentious, that life is not a game of starting a YouTube channel and getting a billion subscribers. Life is simplistic, and we should get in touch with nature. And this kind of flirts with Heidegger in some way. But this is what I'm talking about with ordinary nihilism. It's something of a positive and something that benefits people's lives, rather than to say that there's nothing and dooming a negative. And that's where I want to talk about liberal nihilism, or I like to call the negative nihilism. That when anybody thinks of the word nihilism, we tend to think of these things. We tend to think of Francis Fukuyama's The End of History and The Last Man. And I, for example, think of Pussy Riot, this kind of Russian Antifa pop band supported by Red Hot Chili Peppers and Madonna and everyone, if you want to have a job in the music industry, while defecating on churches in Russia because, they're against authority, they're against fascism or something like that. Well, their whole life outlook is freedom. And nihilism has become somewhat sadly a tool for people who want to excuse their decadence and depravity and looking for freedom. On Fukuyama's part, if the end of history is nothing more than global capitalism, then I guess we're all here to consume, to be liberals. We have the right to commit heinous acts of crimes. There's no ethics in liberal nihilism. Not that you don't believe in rules or hierarchies and whatnot. You just believe in this type of doom that the next day is today. And it's all about you basically being a black person with a welfare check and not making your life any better. Maybe that's a harsh example, but point in being is that we all know that this kind of nihilism is associated with liberal nihilism. So is nihilism life affirming? I believe, as I said before, absolutely. But not in the liberal kind. It's not life affirming in the liberal kind. Somewhere along a historical perspective, nihilism fused with other middle class or bourgeois disciplines, and ultimately was co opted under capitalism and some kind of postmodernism, and to some extent Marxism. But this is where nihilism became bad. where being humble was being replaced with being pretentious. The saying, no gods but man, that you are God and that you could do whatever you want. You could be Charles Manson, it doesn't matter. You can commit crime, and this kind of becomes horrible to some extent because there's no form of ethics allowed. It's just this amazing atheist retardation. But the classical nihilism, the ordinary nihilism, believes in religion, not region, and God. Sorry, I wrote region, but it's actually religion. And so we must ask, can we take nihilism back? And my answer is yes, we can. And we can learn a lot from the values and wisdoms of ordinary nihilism while negating and throwing away liberal nihilism. For example, I think ordinary nihilists can learn a lot from Bob Black and his work on the abolition of work. That work itself is oppressive, and we're better off being lazy and focusing in the arts or just existing every day. Even to some extent, Max Stirner and his work on the ego and its own, that it's about your ego, who matters, as long as it might sound narcissistic, but this is about nihilism. This is about, that there is no higher force that controls you, and that being humble has to do with not knowing that work and harms you, and the ego is important to yourself. And this is not to say it's some form of extreme individualism like liberalism is saying, but it is to say that the intellectual, almost the philosophical path is a Nietzschean type of nihilism. And this is why I put Lao Tzu to the right. Well, Lao Tzu, you could say, is a nihilist, believes in Wu Wei and the changing of things. And being a monk, maybe I should say, being an Asian monk, escaping from accelerating technological society, going out and living on a mountain, being a monk, getting rid of all this nonsense information, becoming a mutus person, never learning to speak again. All these things, Bob Black, Stirner, and Lao Tzu are humble, and you could actually say are an ordinary type of nihilism of respecting this and incorporating our values into as a remedy against this late capitalist society we live under. And I sincerely say this for all YouTube retards who have a YouTube channel and who are lost in consumption, lost in Cyberpunk 2077. They don't know any other path to go. The value and wisdom we can learn from ordinary nihilism is that our lives are pretty ordinary. We're not extraordinary, and we shouldn't strive to being extraordinary. Sure, we can lift weights and live a good life and be romantic and Platonist, but ultimately, our lives are more important when we know we exist and have our limits. That being a good life is just as the nihilist life. You don't have to be some kind of bodybuilder. You could just be you. And this is a type of value that you learn for being a humble philosopher type. And so this is some wisdom for every one of you. Actually, pick up Bret Stephens' nihilism book or look into classical nihilism, because we could definitely incorporate it into some type of happy Eurasianist society, and as well as a remedy against all this nonsensical anti-capitalist Catholic thought that's going around. I'm an anti-capitalist, but still at the same time, all these retarded internet spheres need a dose of nihilism before anything else. Thanks for listening.